Okay, it's
Where my contact.
it's not going to go on, but this isn't on.
So it's still not working.
Yeah, no, it isn't.
Blue or something? Wish you stayed there.
No. You don't need to stay in Peru. And let me tell you, you should never.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to call the Planning Board meeting for December 17th, 2019 to order. My name is Kathy Barnard. I'm the chairman, and let me introduce the other members of the Planning Board, starting down at the my left-hand end, Susan Replier, Planning Board member. Next to Susan Von Dugan, who is the vice chairman of the Planning Board. To my right, Mike Hodder. Next to Mike, John Thurston and Peter Goodwin and Brad Harriman. At the end of the table, Brad is the representative from the Board of Selectmen to the Planning Board. We have a number of amendments to the zoning ordinance scheduled for tonight. And Planning Board members, what I'm thinking is that we'll hold the public hearing, and then rather than acting on these items tonight, we do have another meeting that we could schedule, hold these open until January 7th, and that we'd still meet the time commitment, and this is due to the weather conditions. Matt has received some calls, and so if we keep the hearing open, people could then attend on January 7th. Would that be okay with everyone? Planning Board members?
Yes.
I'd also add that I did receive legal comment just today from council, so I'd like an opportunity to address those legal comments in an amended version of these, although it doesn't affect the majority of them. The legal comments have not been incorporated, though they're minor in nature.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so how we'll proceed then, I'll read each item into the record and then turn it over to Matt, who will go through the details of the amendment. Once that's completed, then we'll open it up for public comment. And once we've received all the comments, then I'll close the hearing. Planning Board members may or may not have comments, and then continue the item until January 7th. So,
Can I just confirm, so the continuation date, you were thinking January 7th for these amendments to the first meeting in January, is that correct? Just for confirmation?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, first article is personal wireless service facilities. This is to amend Article XXV1, personal wireless service facilities, to bring the ordinance into compliance with state and federal law regarding modifications to existing facilities and duration of special exceptions, to permit such facilities by special exception in all districts except the shorefront residential district, and to make minor changes to certain sections of the ordinance, including but not limited to the definition of fall zone and the specifications of material and color of facilities which extend above vegetation. Okay, so I'll turn this over to you, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to begin the meeting, I want to address the provisions of RSA 675(7), particularly as they pertain to this amendment that is proposed. Some of the folks in the audience may have received an individual property notice, and the reason for that is that the modifications that we are proposing to the personal wireless facilities ordinance were viewed as a substantial change to a permitted use, and therefore under this state law we were actually required to send individual verified mail to property owners if they're located in a zoning district that is smaller with 100 properties. So The zoning notice does not imply there's any direct project impact immediately, but what it does imply is that there's a permitted use change within those zoning districts, and that's the reason for your receipt of notification. For this presentation, which will be the longest presentation of the night on a zoning amendment, we're going to start off with a presentation by a consultant who worked on behalf of the Planning Board to amend the ordinance. Attorney Steve Grill is in the audience. And the reason for that is that one of the more substantial changes that we're proposing to the ordinance is related specifically to changes in statute and also changes in FCC law as well and U.S. law. And as a result, we've asked Attorney Grill to step in and explain those changes and hopefully answer any questions that the public might have.
Thank you, Matt, and good evening, folks. Good evening, members of the board. As Matt said, I'm Steve Grill. I'm an attorney in Wolfeboro, in Moultonboro, New Hampshire. I'm here tonight in Wolfeboro. The planning department asked me to take a look at the existing ordinance in light of some changes to the law which affect the issue that we call modification. And essentially what we're talking about is an existing facility, usually a tower, but sometimes it could be a building mounted antenna structure or something like that. And there was a change to the federal law. Now, these wireless facilities, which is an area that I've concentrated my practice in for the last 20 plus years, have a special protection under federal law which limits to some extent the ability of municipalities such as the town of Wolfeboro to regulate them. So when the federal law changes, it directly impacts the ability of towns to regulate wireless facilities. So in 2012, Congress passed a law, and it was signed into law by, I think, President Obama, which limits the ability of towns to say no to modifications of existing structures. And there's kind of a, it's a very heavily dependent on definitions, which, you know, we probably won't go through in detail unless people have specific questions. But in essence, if someone comes in and says, there's an existing tower and I want to raise it up by no more than 20 feet, they are, in most circumstances, entitled to just go and get a building permit. And you can't require them to go through the normal permitting process. And because that law changed, the state of New Hampshire passed an amendment to its regulation of wireless facilities, which is known as Chapter 12K, that basically followed the federal law, which was a little bit vague, and tried to put some meat on the bones. Then the FCC came along the following year in 2014 and put its own meat on the bones, which was a little bit different than what the state of New Hampshire had done. So under the preemption doctrine, the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution, the federal law and the regulations promulgated under the federal law are supreme. So those are what govern the limits on the town's ability to say no to modifications. Hopefully I haven't lost anybody yet, but feel free, if you know, to interrupt me, raise your hand if I'm getting too much in the weeds. So right now we have a situation as of 2014 where federal law defines what is a substantial modification or a substantial change to an existing facility. If it is not a substantial change, then it's building permit only. So the tower owner or a tenant can come into the town hall and pull a building permit, and there's not much anyone can do about it. The state law that was passed prior to the FCC regulations still has some impact, but only to the extent it's even more restrictive on the towns than the federal law. That shows up mostly in the process and particularly in the time deadline. So I think we had up on the board that the requests must be approved within 45 days. So So what this means, and let me back up and say what we've done in this proposed amendment, because what the town had on the books did not comply with all of these various changes that have taken place over the past several years. What we've done is we've essentially created a process for an off-ramp from the normal zoning of wireless facilities. Someone can come in and say, I think I have an eligible request, an eligible facilities request, which means that I think it is not a substantial modification, therefore it's building permit only. When they do that under what we're proposing, which is what the law now requires, planning staff has to look at that and make a decision within 45 days whether or not they agree. If they agree, they say, yes, we agree, you're within rights to ask for a building permit and there's nothing we can do about it. If they fail to act within that 45-day period, then it's deemed to be an acceptance. It's deemed to be an agreement that, yes, they comply with this eligible facilities request. There are some exceptions to that. The planning staff has the right to ask for additional information because there are some nuances to this. And again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds. It's still early and I don't want to put everybody to sleep. But one of the things is, for example, if the proposed modifications, even if it's less than 20 feet of additional height, if it requires new excavation outside of the originally approved site plan, then that kicks it out of this automatic building permit and puts it back into the full power of the zoning process. So in that case, the planning staff may have some questions. Where are you going to put the new conduit for this new antenna system that you're putting in? And the applicant may say, oh, well, actually, we have to excavate because we didn't really plan for this 10 years ago. That may kick it out. So there may be some situations, that's just an example, where planning staff has a dialogue and asks for more information, and that may extend the process out. But essentially, the real important one from most people's perspective is height, because that's what people are most concerned about with these facilities. If someone comes in and they're asking for less than, for 20 feet or less of additional height, in most cases they're going to get it, and there's really very little that can be done about it. And the point of this sort of presentation that I'm making and the kind of pretty lengthy amendment to the ordinance is to make all of this in conformity with what the law requires. So, have I lost anybody yet, or does anybody have any questions about that?
Just to add in a quick point, one of the things that we've maintained from the existing ordinance to the new ordinance is that any new facility will be subject to a special exception and site plan review by both the zoning board for the special exception and the planning board for site plan review. So we have not modified that portion of the ordinance in any way. All we've done is come into compliance on the co-location side when it comes to these eligible facilities requests to ensure that we're actually following the right process internally.
I didn't mention co-location for folks who may not be familiar with that term. It's simply when you have an existing structure, again, usually a tower, but not always. Sometimes it's on top of a building, or it might be a steeple or something like that. But typically it's the towers that draw the most interest and concern. If there's an empty slot on the tower and someone comes along and says, I want that empty slot, that's typically going to be one of these eligible facilities requests that has to be granted. Again, they just show up, they make their presentation to staff. Staff says, yeah, it looks like it meets all the checklist, therefore, here's your building permit. So that's typically what's going to happen for new antennas on existing structures and for increases in height that don't exceed the limit of what is or is not a substantial modification. I mean, those are the main points of that. Is there anything else, Matt, that you think needs
Kathy,
to?
did you have a
No, I was going to ask you if you were going to add to that.
I'm going to add to the zoning-based restriction, but I
Okay.
just wanted to make sure the board was comfortable and the public was comfortable.
Well, then we'll open the public hearing after the presentations by both of you.
Okay. Yep.
We have also made some minor administrative amendments to the ordinance, and that was based on review by council. We had some sort of unclear information within the ordinance, particularly when it came to our fall zone definition. We've now added catastrophic failure as a justification in the fall zone section. We had a requirement that all towers be painted gray, which didn't frankly make very much sense in the event that the tower is made of galvanized steel initially, so we had a minor modification there. Also just changed some of the references to the appropriate FCC guidelines. Those were incorrect. They had the incorrect dates within the ordinance. And then removed a portion of the ordinance that placed time restrictions on the special exceptions in site plan review approval, which are not legal under New Hampshire state law. So those were removed to ensure that we're compliant with New Hampshire RSA. But what I think that many folks may want to hear about this evening is something that's, I think, garnered some public concern, and I'm hopeful we hear from folks this evening. We have also opened up section 175-161, which was the pre-existing location requirements for new non-camouflaged exterior facilities portion of the ordinance. I've shown this crossed out because this is the existing section of the ordinance. It listed really these zoning districts where new facilities were allowed. And these zoning districts, to sort of save us some explanation, these zoning districts don't exist in this form any longer today. Whether it be the C2, the Wolfeboro Center, the GR2, the GR3, none of these zones actually exist as they were contemplated by the ordinance. As a result, we've actually reviewed that map at that time, and this is very crude, and I apologize for the graphic here, but it's intended to send a pretty clear picture, and that is that this is the map of Wolfeboro overall. What I've done here is any section in pink, as it's shown, was a section in which a new non-camouflaged facility was allowed under the old ordinance. Any section in blue, particularly those around the shorefront area, along the historic district outline, and also in the downtown core, the C1 CBD, the Bay Street Limited Business District, those are the only areas in which a new non-camouflaged facility would have been prohibited. What we're proposing to do to address the issue of the fact that those zoning districts no longer exist is to actually allow new non-camouflaged facilities in all zoning districts, and with the exception of the shorefront residential district. And what that functionally does, to translate it to today's zoning terms, is it adds the following districts: the Municipal Watershed District, the Bay Street Limited Business District, the C1 Central Business District, which is our downtown, the Cotton Mountain Historic District, and the eastern portion of Pine Hill Road, which is actually was a different zoning district at an earlier time. Those are the 5 geographic areas that we would be functionally adding in where new non-camouflaged facilities could be constructed based on what the planning board has proposed. As we go back, just to look at the map again, Municipal Watershed District is up in this area, Pine Mountain Historic is out here, C1 Central Business District is right here, Bay Street Limited Business District is out on Bay Street, and then the eastern portion of Pine Hill Road, of course, runs up right here. The justification for this change is quite simply that the board felt that the initial selection in the 2001 ordinance was somewhat arbitrary, and I don't want to speak for specific board members, but my sense was that the board felt that if the applicant was able to meet the burden of the ordinance and the height restrictions and all of the dimensional requirements, that it was not necessarily the board's feeling that they needed to review the location of a specific facility. And therefore, what we've done is open up the ordinance to any location within town. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions from both the board and the public.
Okay, let's see, why don't we go planning board questions first, and then go ahead, Peter.
I have a question about the tower can be raised 20 feet. And the applicant can come back 5 years, 10 years later and raise it another 20 feet?
There it goes. The question is, can you have successive modifications 20 feet this year, 20 feet 5 years from now, and so on? And the answer to that is no, because one of the definitions requires the measurement to be made based on the original tower height, or the height as of the date the law changed, which is 2012. So you may have had a tower built a long time ago that was modified before 2012. You would use the height, in that case, at 2012. You get 20 feet from that, and that's it. If it's built after 2012, you use that height. Whatever the height was at the original construction, that's where you measure from, and you get, one chance. Or theoretically, I guess you could get 10 feet and then come back for another 10 feet. But that's probably unlikely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before I open?
I got a thing here that puzzles me a little bit. If we talk about location, and if we start using 5G in our ordinance here, seems that if something is in a wetland, we have to abide by those zoning rules for a larger something or other, or are we going to allow what they're calling antennas to be mounted on poles in the wetland areas, like on 109A, where it runs along the side of the road across from the cemetery? Do you see what I'm saying? I mean,
Sure. So the answer is that if the mounting to the pole does not impact the wetland in any way, if there's no disturbance, then it would not be subject to the wetlands ordinance. But I believe that if a new pole or anything of the like that would disturb land, the jurisdiction would still be with the town to require a special use permit for any locally based ordinance that governs wetlands, John. So
I'm looking at environmental standards on A, where it says personal wireless facilities shall not be located in wetlands. But if we're going to a 5G, then those are potentially going to be on small poles. Is that correct?
I think you hear a lot of different things, so it's hard to know exactly what the carriers are planning. They certainly are planning smaller and lower facilities, but whether they're actually planning to go on telephone poles, I really haven't heard that, particularly in more rural areas. That might work in downtown, but it probably would not work as you get away from the more developed parts of town. So probably not probably not a reason for great concern at this point that you're going to see a lot of these popping up all over the place. Time will tell, but I think it's still many years out and a lot can change.
I think the ordinance is clear that if a new facility came in within the wetland and it had a dredge and fill permit from the state of New Hampshire, I believe the town would have the authority to deny that request. If it was located in the wetland buffer, though, and was subject to a special use permit, I think the board has the authority to grant that special use permit, but it would depend on whether it's a co-location or a new installation, whether it would actually be triggering that ordinance or not.
Thanks. I got one more question, and it comes to the map. I know last time we talked about allowing all areas except the shorefront, but when I look at these little maps and they show all the little red spots, they show all the little red spots out near the edges of the lake. And I'm wondering if people are in boats or have an accident or something, is this really what we want, or should we come up with a camouflage pole like they have at Birchmont, which is a tree? I mean, we didn't really give it a whole lot of discussion.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer, John, but I think that's something that we should consider. I think the one thing that lends itself to coverage is the fact that the topography around the lake tends to be sloping down, and therefore the coverage is better, but the map contradicts that. It actually says that Winter Harbor is one of the areas that's most challenged, and that, the Cricket Hill area. So I think that's something we should consider. It probably would have to be something that the board decides on tonight for the next iteration of the ordinance.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead and open the public hearing. Any member of the public that wants to comment on the personal wireless service facilities ordinance change, come on up, give us your name and your comments.
I don't have a comment because all I have is questions, but
Okay,
I think
well,
one of the
that's
key
fine.
drivers of this discussion is what constitutes camouflaged. I mean, I don't know. This is not my bailiwick. You guys know what a non-camouflaged versus a camouflaged is. Is that the one in All Saints? Is there one in All Saints steeple? I don't know. So maybe those of us who are in the back seat here would like to know more about the definitions and what the visual effects are.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
I think one of the things to point out is that the camouflage definition, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. It says that it's a personal wireless facility that is disguised, hidden, part of an existing or proposed structure, or placed within an existing or proposed structure. That constitutes camouflage. It would not include, well, it would include potentially something hidden within trees, or what we refer to, I think, as monopines, or what you see a lot of across the state of New Hampshire. And I think, yes, yeah. So that would be effective as camouflage under the ordinance. So that's an excellent point. And one of the things I want to point out is that the dimensional standards that limit the height that a monopine, for example, can be over the surrounding trees, those are not changing at all within the ordinance. You'd still be required to get a variance if you're proposing to go above the average AGL or above ground level of the surrounding trees. That we're not changing at all. But I think it's important, again, to sort of emphasize that the existing ordinance technically does allow new non-camouflaged facilities in a variety of locations, but it does ask that the applicant sort of, at the proof of burden, if you will, is on the applicant to explain to the planning board why it's not able to camouflage what it's proposing. So that is something that any applicant coming with a new facility will be asked to do in front of this board. I hope that answered.
Other comments, questions?
I think I got lost on the,
Okay, why don't you tell us who you are?
sorry, Suzanne Ryan.
Thank you.
Wolfeboro. On the areas where non-camouflaged were in your map, where they were allowed and not allowed, or not allowed.
So new non-camouflage were allowed in all of the pink areas shown on that map.
And where are they not allowed?
In the blue area. This was when the zoning in the prior or existing zoning ordinance.
So it doesn't apply now?
It would not apply if this proposal passes. If this proposal passes, the limitations would only be around the shorefront residential district, which are basically.
And why is that?
Why is that?
Why did you change that?
The reason that we changed that is we felt that the selection of zoning districts before was somewhat arbitrary, and that dimensional requirements would create the level of regulation that the planning board felt it needed to make sure that the facilities didn't compromise the character of the neighborhood. So basically, they felt that the standards, the dimensional standards, would restrict development to the extent necessary rather than the actual zoning district in which it's placed.
Well, I'm disappointed that you've taken those areas out.
Okay?
The Cotton Mountain area and thereabouts are some of the most likely places that somebody would want to locate because of the elevation. And my question initially would have been, how is it that you selected the shorefront to protect? And I was wondering if a town was allowed to designate certain areas of protection, and obviously they are because you selected the shorefront, which makes sense. But I would also then say, since you can do that, you could have done the historic area as well, and I'm disappointed to hear that you didn't.
Well, Suzanne, what I would say is that's okay, and that's the reason for these public hearings. So if your feeling is that the historic district should not be included, I think the board is willing to listen to any suggested amendments. So, we haven't decided on this, and that's why we want to have two public hearings. So I think I hear your comment, I understand it, and I think the board is willing to listen.
When you read some of the federal regulations and the cases, and of course it's still being commented on, there's still comment going in on this from California and, you know, states all around, their governors and the mayors, and people are upset that they're losing the control. And so this will be ever-changing, as you did know, and as will the 5G rollout. That's a nightmare that a little town like this probably won't see for a long time. But I am concerned that the elevated areas that for which there is the visual view from the lake coming in off the boat. Matt, we've been through this in this town long before you came here with what ended up.
Let's talk to us. We're going to make the
And
decision.
the board, some of the new board members might not know, there was the issue of the cell tower on Bennett Hill and proposed for Poor Farm Hill, which is a town property, and that was fought vehemently, and we all prevailed. But part of the argument on that was that when you're coming in off the lake and you see these towers, it spoils the aesthetic value, and it is a value. Our beautiful views from down here looking up is a value to the community, and so I wish you would really reconsider that, and maybe I could say it better at the next meeting when I've had time to put it together.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
And is the historic district only like 300 feet off the road? 350? 250. So it's not the hills, it's just along the roads, that old.
Yeah, and I think one comment that I should have made before is that my sense is that we're hearing a tremendous amount of concern in the community about the availability of wireless coverage. And the case that I think I made to the board in one of our initial discussions was, is it really up to the planning board to decide where or where not coverage is needed, and therefore where or where not new facilities are needed to provide that coverage? And I think it's obviously the planning board's legal authority to do that, but if we're hearing this concern in the public, what's the best way for the board to react, and how do you balance the concern over aesthetic and environmental with the fact that we have a public safety / connectivity concern? That's why we've recommended this, what we believe to be a balanced approach, to include all of the zones with the exception of the shorefront residential. But I think I understand your comments.
Yeah, Matt, you said essentially what I had intended to say as well when I came to consider where or if even the board should try to limit the placement of towers based upon zoning districts. The problem was striking a balance between the convenience to the citizens of having cell phone access where they want it and where they need it, and internet access at their homes, with the need to protect the aesthetic parts of the town, principally the ones that are the economic powerhouse for the town. And to my mind, the economic powerhouse for the town is the shorefront residential district, where people come in off the lake, where the stores are, the downtown area is. If I can protect those areas from cell phone towers without doing damage to the convenience of the people there who want to use their cell phones when they want to, yet allow cell phones elsewhere in town to provide convenience to the citizens who live there, this compromise seemed to me to be the best solution. Prohibit in the shorefront, allow everywhere else. As the town grows, as 5G eventually rolls in, and I'm not looking forward to that time any more than you are, people are going to want the service. If we prohibited the service in various parts of town, we're going to be running into a roadblock there, and we're not going to be doing a service to the citizenry.
Okay. Any other member of the public? John, did you
I'd like
want
to make
I'm sorry, just a second,
Yeah, I just
John.
want to make a
Sorry,
quick comment.
come on.
The Camp Birchmont Tower is a giant sequoia tree. You don't even see the thing. So I don't know why that isn't on the table in all these areas. If we want to get real and we want to give service, let's camouflage the thing in a aesthetically pleasing way, and everybody can get what they need.
Okay, so, sorry.
Good evening. I'm Kirk Beswick. I'm here representing Taylor. I was actually here for the Pine Hill discussion, but now that I've heard kind of what's going on here, I did have some thoughts. And one is, I guess I had a question first. Since we've been talking about the strategic plan, the 5-year, the long-term plan for what the growth of the community is going to look like, and we've had a lot of public commentary about that, especially in regards to the commingling of residential communities, light industrial, commercial applications, the rezoning, and I'm thinking specifically about the Bay Street Limited Commercial and the Pine Hill, because that affects us. When you start looking at this, did you consider the ramifications of the long-term strategic plan and the growth of the community and the balancing act that we were talking about prior in regards to the abutters, and specifically the commingling of residential communities that are already being impacted by the expansion of somewhat industrial, commercial, retail applications in those areas? That's a long-winded question, I guess.
No, and I think that I guess the answer is yes. I mean, I think that we're recognizing that one of the biggest consumers of the broadband style deployment that we're talking about is cell phone users, and I think to your constituents, senior citizens as well, are one of those. And I think that when we're talking about the balance of commercial and residential use, we've identified the Bay Street Limited Business District, Wolfeboro Falls, and our downtown as a focus area for where economic development and other development is going to happen. And I think that broadband is a critical piece of that. These towers are not the only solution, obviously. We're still going to have wireline telecommunications, no question, for a long period of time. But we also recognize, I think, that wireless deployment is going to only increase, and the only way to really effectively do that is with the structures that we're talking about permanent here. But, and you and I have talked about this, I mean, certainly there's going to be a sensitivity to a new tower going up. There's no question about that. But I think that my feeling personally, at least, is that the benefit to the public is outweighs the impact to the potential property owners, as long as that development is done in a way that's respectful of the dimensional requirements that we have in the ordinance.
And I hear that, and I think we all can appreciate that, but I have to state that I haven't seen a lot of really well camouflaged cell towers. You could see them. They're very visible, and not many people are usually very happy with them.
Yep.
I have one line of sight at my property in Meredith, and I live on 36 acres. I can't see a house in any direction, but I can see a cell phone tower. So I guess my concern is, for our community, where we have a residential community, then what we're saying is it's very possible for the property behind me to be sold and a tower to be erected right behind my community.
And I would agree with you, and I without belaboring the point, but I would also say that that reality has existed for a period of 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to comment on some other people's motives, but there may be interested in doing this.
No, and I know that.
Okay, Matt, let him make his points, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, no, I just had a concern because I was very surprised to see that every zoning district would have been opened up to those based on the conversations and what I saw in the strategic plan. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What do you mean, do we want? We're here for the public hearing for this, and we are going to continue.
Oh, well, so that you could move on. I can wait to the next meeting, but what about an overlay over that of what we currently get for reception? There's already service more than what is noted on the town website. And it would be interesting to see an overlay over that of what currently service is provided, what dead spots that will never, no matter what you put in, will cover. There'll always be dead spots no matter what's invented. And just to put up a pink map, I don't think cuts it.
Look at those.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on the information that you did give us?
I'm happy to comment, but Ms. Ryan is addressing that information directly, and she is pointing out that those data are, we don't know just how representative they really are of the overall condition in the town. We know that the point data is accurate to a certain extent, but we don't have a full map of what the town looks like from a service perspective. We have some information from specific carriers, but we don't have an aggregated map of what the total coverage is of the community. I wish that we did, and I wish I could give that to you so we could make this process easier. We do know where our existing cell tower locations are.
We know where the cell tower locations are, and of the 6 cell towers in the town of Wolfeboro, 3 of them are very close to the shorefront, downtown, and the other 3 are scattered out, one closer towards Tuftonboro, and none in your neighborhood whatsoever. Cell towers are placed where there are customers, and there aren't a whole bunch of people up by you.
So do we have a cell phone tower right near us, Matt?
Right here?
Yeah, anywhere near us?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, yes.
What's it, how's it displayed?
It is displayed as a chimney on a building.
Thanks.
One of the things that I would like to say is that the areas which are being changed from you can't have a cell tower to having a cell tower, the historic district, scenic roads, would allow a cell tower to be 300 feet off that road, and it doesn't really change much how it is done. And none of these areas are really going to change any of the way that people are going to view things. And so I don't think that the changes associated with the fact that these districts are not the way they really were and the way it's going to end up make any real significant change in how cell towers can be located.
Okay, other public comments on this ordinance? Then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, but again, it will be continued at the January 7th meeting if people have additional comments. Planning board members, did you have any more comments on this one at this time? Okay.
Could I just add something very quickly? I am concerned about the January 7th meeting, particularly because we will not have an opportunity to discuss amendments before that public hearing. We do have enough time to have our second public hearing on the mid-January meeting, and I apologize for changing direction here, but if we are going to consider any substantive amendments at the end of the night, and we don't have time for full discussion this evening, I just want to make sure you have time to review those.
Okay. You're saying if we make an amendment on the 7th, that we would not have time to?
No, I'm saying that if you continue the hearings this evening to the 7th,
right,
I will not have an opportunity to meet with you and discuss potential changes, if any, based on the public hearing this evening before that public hearing night.
Okay, well, I'm trying to find out from the planning board members, and they don't seem to want to suggest any changes at this point.
I just have one grammatical.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that was the impression.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, John.
175-168.
Yes.
170.
All the way to the end, it says slight line representation. I think that's supposed to be sight line.
John, where is? Oh, yep. Thank you.
What page?
Last one.
Bottom page 17.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Slight line.
Okay. Then I'm going to move on to the next item. This is amending 175-175 of the zoning ordinance, and that's the called the terms defined. That's the definition section. The definition that we're changing is called habitable space, and this is to amend the current definition of habitable space to define habitable space exemptions to include toilet rooms on the first floor only and remove full bathrooms as habitable space. This came about basically because the code officer had some concerns. He felt that the definition of habitable space needed to be clearer because it seems that we were finding more and more dwellings in accessory buildings. And but when Planning Board discussed this, we still want to allow toilet rooms in detached garages. So Matt is now going to go through a really clear explanation of this change.
It's an interesting problem that we're having, and an amendment to the habitable space definition is actually a bit of a roundabout way to correct it. The problem that we're having is actually in the accessory structure definition in the ordinance, which you don't see here. And the reason that a problem exists there is because accessory structures are not permitted to have any habitable space within them, meaning living space. However, the existing ordinance specifically exempts bathrooms as habitable space, and therefore you can put a full bathroom in a detached structure, whether it be a shed or a garage. Now, the issue that we've been seeing over the past couple of years is that we've seen bathrooms installed, particularly those on second floors in accessory structures, and seeing the upstairs of those accessory structures being converted into dwelling units at a maximum and into just living space more generally as sort of a minimum. It's incredibly challenging for us to regulate that beyond knocking on the door and asking folks if we can come inspect their structure. So as a result, what we've proposed is an amendment moving forward to still permit toilets within accessory structures so that you can have a shop toilet within your garage if you'd like to, but to not permit a full bathroom and not permit toilet rooms on the second floor, which we again think would lend itself to habitable space being created upstairs. As a result, the amendment is to simply allow toilet rooms as habitable space, or exempt toilet rooms as habitable space, and we think that this amendment will address that issue.
And a toilet room would include a toilet and a sink.
That's correct. It would not include a full tub or shower. And just to be clear, a shower could be permitted in other ways, if it's an exterior shower or something to clean oneself off, but we would not allow an actual unified bathroom within an accessory structure.
Okay. Planning board members, any questions? Right, okay. Then I'll open the public hearing on this item. So anyone that wants to comment or ask a question about the definition of habitable space, now would be the time to do that. Are you about to jump up, Suzanne? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, could I ask a procedural question?
Okay.
Regarding the continuation, because initially you opened it up and said there'd be a continuation.
Yes.
And then amendments could be made, and then you realized that the time frame wasn't going to allow you to make amendments at the January meeting because of the time frame. So with the telecommunication one, I backed off and said I'd come to your next meeting to make my case.
Sure.
But it sounds like even if I made the best case, the board wouldn't be able to make amendments because there isn't time.
No, the board does still have the opportunity to make amendments. What I was suggesting is that we wouldn't have an opportunity to meet prior and make any amendments that the board wanted to make based on the public comment this evening. You would still have the opportunity to make your case, request specific amendments at that second public hearing.
And it allows them enough
Yes.
time
Yes.
to discuss them
Yes.
and still meet your posting dates
Yes.
Yes.
if they accept a change?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, because the final decisions don't need to be made until January.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, but later on in January, so there is time. So, sorry for that.
And to
I
be
was
honest
confused
with you,
too, so.
the board could ultimately even decide to continue the public hearings to that mid-January meeting if it really felt that it needed to revisit some matters that are raised at that meeting.
January
Yeah.
27th.
Thank you. Okay, habitable space, then I'm going to close the public hearing if no one has any comments. And planning board members, are you all set? Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next item, which is 175-47, Building Codes. This is to amend the current Building Codes section by removing the references to specific 2003 and 2002 codes and replace with a broad reference to the current adopted state building code under RSA 155-A and RSA 155-A:10. And basically, this is to to update the building codes that are in place now and with a new ordinance change. And go ahead, Matt.
Very little to add to that. We had an antiquated list of codes within our ordinance that were governed by the state building codes, so we were using the 2009 code as we're supposed to. Our ordinance referenced these 2003 and 2002 codes. Therefore, what we're suggesting is an amendment that simply refers directly to the state statute related to building code, therefore taking out or removing the need to update this on an ongoing basis as the state codes are adopted. One thing I do want to point out is in the event that the municipality decided to adopt a more stringent code, we would go back to this to make that amendment, but this should serve us well in any other case outside of that.
Hey, thank you. I'll open the public hearing on this item, titled Building Codes. Anyone want to comment on that? As you can see, it's just sort of an updating our zoning ordinance. So if no one wants to comment, I'll close the public hearing. Planning board members, did you have any comments, or do you want me to move on? Okay, all right. Next item is 175-44E, general provisions, signs, placement of signs, to repeal and replace the existing language within 174-44E with language that prohibits all signage from the public right-of-way with the exception of off-premises building directional signage, which is required to be placed within the public right-of-way. Such business directional signage may now only be placed in the right-of-way where it does not pose a public safety hazard and only on approved, permitted town-owned posts at intersections within the Bay Street Limited Business District, Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District, and Central Business District, and at designated locations. Business directional signs shall be limited to a maximum of 2 within the town per business. Only 1 post per intersection shall be permitted. Signs and signposts shall be uniform in size and shall conform to this ordinance's restrictions. Signage in existence as of April 1st, 2019, which does not conform to the requirements of this section, shall be designated as lawfully existing non-conforming sign both on private and public property, with the exception of those that present a hazard to public health and safety. Pre-existing non-conforming signage shall expire at the time that the business ceases operation. At such time, the sign may not be reestablished for a new business. And just let me add, Brad, are you going to step down from this?
Yes, I just wanted to go on record that I'm going to recuse myself from this.
Okay. This all started in 2011 when an amendment was approved that allowed the placement of business directional signs within the public right-of-way. An ordinance was developed at the request of some downtown business owners in order to provide wayfinding signs to direct pedestrians in the greater downtown area, the walking area. In 2014, some of these were found to be a hazard. So the Planning Board appointed a committee that has been looking at this issue since that time and came up with some suggested changes to the ordinance that Matt is going to review. And then the Planning Board, once the committee brought these to the Planning Board, the Planning Board authorized us to go ahead with the proposed amendment. So go ahead, Matt, please.
Kathy, thanks for the history, and I'm going to quickly comment on what the ordinance contains, but I did want to note for folks, it's a little late now, I guess, but I hope when you walked in you did get a copy of the materials or you got a copy online. This is one that really helps to have in front of you as we sort of walk through the provisions of the ordinance, but it's about a page in length. The objective here is to replace the existing content contained in the business directional sign section of the ordinance under 175-44E. That's, again, currently the off-premise business directional sign ordinance. What we're trying to do here is prohibit all signage from the public right-of-way with the exception of the specific business directional sign. I'll get to exactly what that means in just a second. That would be the only type of signage allowed within the public right-of-way. And to this end, this mimics the existing ordinance as it is today. What we've now added, though, is this provision that basically provides a mechanism, and we hope it's a mechanism that allows for the placement of signs in the future. And that mechanism is to allow the permitting of these signs on town-owned posts, again, because they are within the public right-of-way, at intersections within very specific zoning districts delineated here. Bay Street Limited Business District, T1 Central Business District, and the Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District. And functionally, these are the zones that encompass the greater downtown loop in Wolfeboro. So anywhere within those three zones, a post could be permitted within the public right-of-way, provided that the town signs off on it. In the interest of providing equity to businesses, and what we really mean here is not allowing one business to do 50 signs and another business to not have any opportunity at all based on location availability, we've restricted it to a maximum of 2 signs per business. And the sign is measured based on, if it's a double-sided sign, that qualifies as 2 signs. If you want to have 2 locations, then you're only allowed one side of a sign at those locations. I would add that only one post is permitted per intersection, and obviously the intent here is that an intersection is the intersection of 2 public ways. I think it defines itself pretty clearly, so only one post at each intersection. Therefore, you wouldn't be allowed to have one on all 4 sides of an intersection, for example. All of the signs and the posts must be uniform in size, and we specifically lay out those criteria, and we haven't modified those at all based on the existing ordinance, but we lay out a size for the sign, the size of the lettering, and all of these dimensional requirements to ensure really that the signs have the same character, but there is going to be some creative flexibility allowed. We haven't required that they all be the same font, the same colors. That is not part of our ordinance. We're allowing the businesses to design their own signage. Where things really get interesting, and I think this is really the last piece that the sign committee worked on, but I think perhaps the most important one, is that the committee has recommended to the board that we functionally grandfather all of the signage that exists in the community today, particularly as of the date that they existed on 4/1/2019. That's really the last date that we have a complete inventory of all of the signage. What we'd be functionally doing then is acknowledging the fact that some of the signage that exists in the community is either A, on private property, or B, was not permitted by the town. We are not going to return to those permits or those signs. We're going to functionally grandfather those based on an inventory that we have. Provided that those businesses continue, and in the event that they do not, the signage would then be taken down by the town. Obviously, if it's on private property, we'd be consulting with the private property owner. I'd also add that on the provision of new signage, not only is it controlled by these 3 zoning districts, we actually make some specific recommendations about where signage might be appropriate, but we do keep it open to other locations as suggested by the permit, the person requesting the permit applicant, that they may, within the public right-of-way, within these 3 zoning districts, request additional signage. With that, I'm happy to take any questions from the board or the public.
Okay, and I want to mention that the members of the committee, John Thurston and Peter Goodwin were the planning board members, and I was also on the committee, but in addition, Roger Murray was a member of the committee, Paul Zimmerman, Mary DeVries, and Julie Jacobs. So we felt that we had a good cross-section for the committee members. Also, please keep in mind, these signs are in addition to the signs that are already allowed on a specific property for a business. And also, the signs were meant to be for the walking public. So that's why they've been designed, or the ordinance has been designed the way it has. So I'll open the public hearing now. So a member of the public that wants to comment on this proposed change, please come on up.
Hi, my name's Troy Lucas. We own Lucas Roasting Company in Back Bay. And I'm not 100% sure, so I want clarification from what I just heard. So if I just heard things correctly, this proposal would, if we wanted a directional sign pointing to our business, we've already been told that our business is hard to find. A single placard on a post with two sides of that sign would constitute our two signs for
Correct.
Direction?
That's correct.
I really vehemently disagree with that. And I say that because when I think about directional signage, and actually we bring a lot of people to our business based on Google searches and internet searches, so people find us that way, but we have some people that have heard about us, and even though we have a giant sign in our property almost to the extent of what's allowed, I think it's a little smaller than what's allowed on our property, the people that know that sign is there can see it plain as day if they're looking for it. But if they're not looking in the right place or not coming the right direction, they're never going to see our sign. So for all of the businesses that are now developing in the Back Bay area, the Makerspace is one. I know the Boat Museum is coming. There's a lot of things that are kind of developing, not just on Main Street anymore, in this town. And we chose actually to put our business, because of the coffee roasting we do, we didn't want to be anywhere close to downtown because it would historically change the nature of this town with the coffee smoke, and it would change what Wolfeboro is. So where we're at is a perfect place for us, but it's really hard for people to find us if they're just driving through. There's no directional signage out on Main Street that points back to where we're at. And so on Main Street, whether you're going north or south, that would be one side of the sign, the other side of the sign, depending on which way you're coming, pointing to our business. And then to go down the street to where Varney meets Bay and put another sign, if you're coming off of French Street and you saw a black sign that didn't have anything on one side but had something on the other side, I think that limiting it to two directional signs for businesses like ours in the Back Bay area, where it's already hard to find, I don't see the point of that. And I feel, well, and we were denied when we moved our business here the right to go ahead and join the others who are now being grandfathered onto those signs. It sounds like in town, we were denied that right to go ahead and place our placard there when we moved because there was something going on with walking signs. And anyway, we were just denied the right to go ahead and place a directional sign at that time. And now, you know, if we have a post that's designated by the town to be for directional use, but only directional use if you happen to be coming the right way on that road, and there's your two signs, that just doesn't make any sense to me as a business owner.
I have a question for you. In that, how do most people actually find your business? Because these signs, in fact, are designed for people walking, as in the print is 4 inches tall.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that said. I'm going to be somebody who, so as somebody who moved here 3 years ago, who didn't grow up here and didn't know this community at all, I have used many of those signs that are placed on posts around town, definitely not walking, but definitely driving, and all of a sudden I see a sign and that's where that business is. I've been wondering where that is. So these are not walking signs specifically. I mean, granted, if you're walking, you're going to see them more slowly, and you're going to recognize all the things that you can see there and maybe go the direction of what they are. But I believe they're definitely more than walking directional signs to the people that visit our community. I mean, we're bringing people into the community that find us online and follow us on social media from an hour to an hour and a half away sometimes. So we're bringing people to the community and they can follow their GPS, but we've had people who have been told that we're in a general location in the Back Bay and, you know, have been told there's a big sign, you'll see it, and drive around looking around and, oh, I finally found it, but it took me a long time to find your place. So we're tucked back in behind other businesses. So our business in particular, I guess I'm kind of vocal because I think we could have a lot more people come to our place if they knew that we were even there. But driving down Main Street, you'd never know that there was a coffee roastery and cafe in Back Bay. There's just everything on Main Street. So.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what the name of your business was and where it was located.
I own Lucas Roasting Company. It's a coffee roasting business. It's located directly behind Needham Electric. So
Behind where?
Exactly, Needham Electric. It's in Back Bay.
Okay.
It's where the makerspace is being built across the road from that. And so that's the thing. When you're not on Main Street in this community, where people can just drive and all of a sudden use a landmark or whatever to find you, you know, we are developing a whole new business district back there with the businesses that are getting ready to come. The makerspace is definitely going to be drawing a lot of people back there. The boat museum is going to be drawing a lot of people back there. The Wolfeboro Community Co-op moved from their space down to their new space, which I think is a great space, but I think in thinking through, I mean, I'm just saying as a business owner, I want to make as much money as I can in this town, and I want as many people to find us as can in this town, and limiting it to a two-sided sign from Main Street that, you know, so if our sign was at Main Street and it was two-sided and it pointed towards Varney, I mean, that would be my two signs. It would point towards Varney, but then would you go to Friend Street? Where would you go? Would you go to Bay Street? So I'm saying that I just don't feel like those directional signs are, if you're saying that they're meant for walking anyway, there's small, really unobtrusive signs. Perhaps there would be the chance to add, you know, another two-sided sign, so 4 total. I don't know what the right number is. I just know that depending on which way you're coming on traffic, you need to consider both directions of traffic and then other intersections that actually bring people to our doors as business owners.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to talk a little bit about how we got here and how we got to accept the findings that are on the table. Before 2011, we had an ordinance, and at some point in time, thereabouts, permits got stopped being issued. Quite a while before 2011 up to 2019, nothing happened. So nobody was getting anything. And I was on the board, and I said it was unacceptable for the board to continue to do nothing. So for all the people that are out there who just moved to our town, this actually is something for them. And when we want to talk about inclusiveness, that's what we want. There's a lot of other people out there. And at this point in time, we really don't know how this is going to go down, but we want to open it up to as many people as we could. And opening it up meant including all the people's signs that were not permitted, but they were permitted, okay? There's a tough gray area there. So we welcome all the people to come to our town. We know that some people had 2 signs that were back-to-back faced, and somebody else was going to have another sign in location. Well, that could eliminate somebody else from another business. So we were trying to be inclusive to however many people potential that could be in the area. We walked down to Bay Street, and we looked at the corner post down there where the old hardware store was, and we're in a very tight, confined area. We looked at the top of Mill Street up there where the sign is on the private property. It's a very tight, confined area. There's about 6 inches of public property on the side of the sidewalk. We've outlined this and combed this thing over to a T. We welcome all new ideas, but we really want to be inclusive to say how many people will be able to join, and invite your friends to join too, because we really want them to know where everybody is. But at this time, I think we're just going to have to say, we've got something and we should try it out.
Thanks, John.
I'll second that. I've lived in town for 35 years. For as long as I've lived here, signs have been a problem of one sort or another, and in my opinion, this is the best compromise solution I've seen so far.
Okay, thank you. Okay, other comments on the signs? Hi.
Hello, my name's Martha Cummings. I'm the executive director at the Boat Museum. I want to just second some of Tony's ideas here with regard to the 2 business directional signs limit, and just keeping in mind that Back Bay, or Bay Street, excuse me, is the new developed business area. And I know the sidewalk is going in there as well. For us, we do have state designated signs I recognize in town that do help people find our existing museum. But I also agree with Mr. Lucas about the small signage that we're talking about tonight. I too am new to Wolfeboro and have utilized those signs when walking, but also driving as well. Just go, oh, that's where that place is that I keep hearing about. With regard to the museum, we would use those 2 up very quickly. What are we doing at the other end of Bay Street on 109A and Bay Street? And I do agree with his point about if you're turning down Mill Street and you don't know exactly, which way that business might be, and it isn't at that 3-way stop on Bay, how would somebody know to continue walking up that way or to drive that way to one of the businesses on Bay Street? So I very much and sincerely appreciate all of the work that has been done here on this ordinance and these amendments. Signage is not easy. And I will say, appreciate the design of it. I just most recently lived in Maine, so I appreciate that sort of you can't get there from here type of signs around town, and I think others do as well. But I would ask if you could think a little bit more on this maximum of 2 business directional signs, and perhaps consider 4 at least as the minimum.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Jerome Holden from Grove Street. The signs that you've decided, the locations that are going to be allowed by the town, the approved and permitted, town approved and permitted on town property posts, can you show us where those are going to be?
Yeah, I'm happy to show that. The approved locations, or their recommended locations, and also they're allowed within 3 zoning districts, Jerome?
Yep.
Happy to show that. Would you like me to have that up before you make your comments?
That would be good, and I don't know if you have one that shows where the posts are now.
I do not have that.
You do not. Okay. So my question is, if Troy wants 2 signs, can he get them on 2 existing posts after this ordinance is approved, where he needs them on those 2 locations?
On posts that were permitted or posts that were not permitted?
There are permitted signs on both posts, but that's not what you were saying.
Right. So if he's adding a sign to a post that is on private property, then he would not be permitted to do that at all. He would be permitted to allow 2 signs on either something that exists that meets the standard of the ordinance, or a new signpost that meets the standard of the ordinance, so in the public right-of-way. What will I fix?
So, John, you had said there was 6 inches of space to the left of the sidewalk in front of Mr. Kent's property where the post exists now. Does that mean we just have to move that post so the sidewalk plow can hit it
Yeah,
instead of off on the property?
Could you speak to the ordinance?
This
please?
is the ordinance, because it's post location.
As in the ordinance, it's all the discretion of whether or not it's safe enough for the criteria. That's how that one's going to be determined.
Okay, and the one on the corner at the old hardware store, is that in the public right-of-way?
I don't believe that post is in the public right-of-way, but there is public right-of-way there. So we may have to discuss moving that post.
Okay.
But that post is actually one of the posts, I believe, that was permitted at that location, so we'll have to talk about that. So we'll have to discuss whether or not it would continue to be permitted into perpetuity. So I think you received permits for signs at that post specifically.
Yes, and also on Roger Kent's post, there are permitted signs.
Sure. So I think that what we're going to have to talk about is whether or not, when the permit was granted, based on the fact that it was not compliant, not your error or whoever pulled the sign permit, but based on the enforcement official's authority, whether or not the town is going to require you to move that post into the right-of-way or not. I'm trying to pull this up right now.
Okay, great.
We should try to stay to the ordinance, the proposed ordinance itself, rather than getting into the weeds of the application to particular posts in town of the ordinance as proposed.
The problem with this, as it is written, is that there are existing posts and they are in locations that all businesses need them.
Okay, well, give us your comments then, and then we'll be able to address them.
Right. So they're in positions that businesses need them, and there are no posts in the places that the committee has proposed, which means no business ever really needed one there, which means there's no reason to put one there after you approve this ordinance.
Okay.
There are two allowances. I'm just going to respond to that, Kathy, because there are two allowances in the proposed ordinance. There's 4 suggested locations, and there's also the allowance within 3 zoning districts. And the 3 zoning districts we're talking about are the Bay Street Limited Business District, which runs along Back Bay here. It's in the brighter red there. The sort of pinkish red, which is the Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District, and also the downtown core, which is the C1 Central Business District, the orange color there. Those are the 3 zoning districts where this ordinance permits new business directional signposts be erected.
Okay. There's presently one at the intersection of 109 and Center Street in the parking lot, I believe is town-owned, that Anthony's Pizza is on. Right? That's in the town right away?
I'm not going to confirm whether these posts are in town right away, because that's something we've looked at extensively.
Please give us your comments, okay, and then.
Well, I want to add that to the list of authorized posts, if possible.
Okay, well then, why don't you put it in those terms?
Okay. And can you zoom in on the corner of 109A and Bay Street? Is it off the map? Oh, there it is. So could there be a post right there on that corner in the orange?
If there's a location that's determined to be in the public right-of-way, which I think there is a portion of that is in the Bay Street Limited Business District, then potentially a post could be placed there.
Okay.
But we are not granting permits this evening, nor post permits.
Nope, I'm just trying to...
I know, I'm just saying that these hypothetical questions, I want to make sure I answer them clearly. There is right-of-way there. It is zoned properly in accordance with this ordinance, so I think it's possible that a post permit could be filed.
Okay, one other location, and that is at the Meredith Village Savings Bank on the opposite corner of where Roger Kent's property is. Could there be a post there in a public right-of-way?
Okay, all right. Okay, so 3 areas you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Trying to get people back to Bay Street legally is what I'm trying to do.
Okay. All right.
He's looking.
Did you have some other comments?
Oh, I have other comments, sure. Well, everybody's addressed the 2 or more business locations they need. Some people need 3. If you don't allow the 2 signs to be 4 signs, basically the way this is written, and you get refused a permit for it and you go to the ZBA, what are the chances you'll get approved?
That we really can't address that.
Okay.
They're a separate body.
So I do know that the selectmen don't really want to do zoning by exception, and that would avoid that.
Okay.
Are you able to find that, Matt?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I want to disconnect again as I can.
What were you looking?
I'm looking at the Meredith Village Savings Bank.
Oh, yes.
It's a question of right-of-way. I mean, I just don't know what the right-of-way allowance is.
Yeah.
I can't give you an answer tonight whether there's a right-of-way there to do it.
Because that would be the potential thing to move the posts across. Maybe that's a legal place, and then you'd get people pointed down there. And we're working with Meredith Village Savings Bank to see if we can get them to say that they would do that in the event that this gets approved.
Okay. Any other comments on the ordinance?
I have a,
What? Okay, go ahead.
I just wondered about this clause in here it lists the 3 districts, and then it says, and at designated locations. What is that?
Those are the designated locations that are just above in the ordinance, so.
And some of them are on town property,
it's
in
not-
Fossfield, and I think that's where both of them, and then one out in front of Town Hall.
Correct.
So they exist.
Yeah, yes. So, and just to, it depends on the width of the right-of-way there, Jerome, but it's possible a permit could be requested there.
Okay, because the sidewalk could go right to the right edge of the right-of-way, right?
That's correct.
Okay, more comments on the ordinance, please.
Okay, so he hasn't been able to pull up where the proposed signs are going to go that are in this ordinance. One is in the town, in front of the town hall here, and it's not going to be where it used to be on the corner down there where it's nice and visible, and there were 3 permitted signs on that post for the Children's Advocacy Center, for the Mexican restaurant, and for Tangle's Hair Salon. If you move it down this island, people are going to be coming into the town offices and asking where these businesses are.
Okay.
Another one, the Center Street intersection of the Bridge Falls Path. If I didn't have a sign and I applied for JC Signs there, I'd be sending people down that walking path to get to my business. Third one, Glennon Street parking lot. I don't see anyone wanting to have a sign there unless you have a business somewhere down in the middle of town that you think people park there and then walk down to town to see. Same thing, Fossfield parking lot. So there are places, there are no signs there now, and I don't see why anyone's going to want signs there. Now, if you did want to do wayfinding walking signs, that's great for tourists. That, with 1-inch letters, that's wayfinding walking sign, but 4-inch letters is driving business directional signs. I think that's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Murray, you had your hand up.
Good evening. My name's Roger Murray, and as was mentioned, I was on this committee. And I think one of the things we looked at was the limited number of places, no matter what you do, where you can put up one of these signs. And we tried to make them so that they would be available for as many people as possible. And under the current ordinance, you're allowed 2 signs per business. And when we looked at the 2 sides of a sign question, many of the places we looked at, there was no way you could put a sign on both sides and have anybody see one side. If you look at the Glendon Street sign by the 100 parking lot, you're not really going to see that from the 100 parking lot sign. The Mill Street sign by Mr. Kent's, you're only going to see one side of that sign. And so that really there isn't, you're probably only going to put one sign there, which gives you another opportunity. But if every business can put up 2 signs, not back to back, then you're limiting the number of businesses that can have signs. And in terms of the location, we also looked at, one point we thought, well, we'll designate locations, and we decided that really we wouldn't. We would let anybody who thought they could come up with a good location to come in and apply for it, rather than having the town dictate where they would go. Now, I think this has been worked at for a long time. We looked at all sorts of issues, and I think what we have is a good ordinance, and it really is the best solution and should be able to serve the interests of as many people as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Hello, Mary DeVries.
Hi, Mary.
And as mentioned, I also was a member of this committee, and I just feel a responsibility with that to echo the comments made tonight by other committee members, while also completely respecting the other public comments made. They reflect all the conversations we had committee level. There's no comment that has been made tonight that the committee didn't spend a substantial amount of time on. And I was very much in favor of the fact that this ordinance would allow the existing signage to stay, and that it allows any business to come and apply for a new post location, because that way, if there is an area that we missed or some new development, it leaves that open, that possibility open for an additional post. Boy, it's such a tough one about limiting the number of signs, but for any one business. But again, the whole conversation really focused around the fact that, number one, no business is ever going to say no thank you to an additional sign. We want them to be able to be found, and also the town didn't want to have to say no to a greater number of businesses. So opening it up to as many businesses to apply as possible. It's not the best scenario for any one business to limit to the two, but it is an offering something. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
The state right-of-way versus the town right-of-way, can the signs be in the state right-of-way if they're already permitted?
So you have an existing post that you're talking about?
Yep.
So the language of the ordinance states that really the only place where off-premise business directional signage is permitted is in the municipal right-of-way. So what I would say then is that despite the state's rules regarding signage, this ordinance allows signage only in town-defined right-of-way. It does not include state right-of-way for off-premise business directional signage. We recognize it's a state signage program, and we recognize that we don't have jurisdiction over that, but the idea of erecting a post within the state right-of-way that would not be covered under our zoning, I don't believe that we would permit that.
So no place along Center Street is going to be allowed to have a signpost, except you are signing on the town property because it's part of the track path.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, and the other problem is if I sell JC signs and someone wants to put a sign, even if it was on town property and it's not, pick some other place. Doesn't seem fair that the business coming in behind me wouldn't be able to at least apply for a permit on that signpost. Like you're trying to get rid of all the signs and all the posts that aren't those 4 locations that are allowed.
Okay, I
don't understand either.
Okay.
Your sign's going to run.
Jerome, can you explain that comment? Can you explain that comment again?
Since the signs at the end of Grove Street, which there is 9 signs on there now, it's fully used all the time, mostly because of that brown building there, the Bonnie Lord's place. That people in there have no front signage, except a couple of them that have big ones on the front, but mostly have no signage, but a little sign on the side of their building, and you can't get around there. There's also Varney Kitchen and Cabinetry down there. They have a sign out there. They're not going to be allowed to have a sign if someone comes in and replaces them, and they're in and out of there all the time. There's no signage out near the road for them anymore.
That's correct. And the answer, my response to that would be, did they receive a sign permit initially?
a lot of them have been in and out since there were permits issued. There's one on there from that building, I think, that says Still Waters.
Okay.
And I have permitted signs on the post. My wife, Johnson's Paint, have permitted signs on the post.
Yeah, my response would be that if the permit was granted in error or the permit was never granted at all, it's being given a one-time exemption from the ordinance, but that cannot be continued into perpetuity. So you're right. We are using this ordinance as a mechanism to remove non-conforming signage. There's no question about that. But we're also granting an exemption to non-conforming signage that we feel we bear some responsibility in the erecting of it. So I guess that answers your question.
I do want to say I very much appreciate that this ordinance covers my business's needs completely for what I need, but what about the future? What about business growth? What about new customers, new business coming in and out of town? Happens all the time. That's why my business survives so well.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I don't really want to further belabor this, but couldn't you put a sign on Pine Street or on Grove Street in the town right away, which would give directional off of Center Street?
Provided that it's in the public right of, it's in the town right of way, then yes, yes.
Okay.
So I don't know anything about the rights of ways, where they land or anything like that, but I would assume that all of our directional signs, not our directional signs, that's what we're talking about now, but the street signs are already in a right of way, right? They're posted, the post goes in the ground in the right of way, and could not that post be used for the directional signs that we're talking about, where intersections happen?
No, so to answer your first question, Troy, the signs, we would assume that they are within the public right-of-way, and I would guess that about 98% of them are. I think you'd probably find one or two that maybe are outside of the public right-of-way because of the age of those right-of-ways and when they were created. They tend to be a little bit funky in their dimension. But what I would say is that we do not, and the Public Works Department would not support, and I don't think the Selectmen would either, the attachment of business signage adjacent to signage that is intended to be public safety oriented, and that being the directional sign for the street name itself. I think you diminish the message by doing that, and you potentially make it so that street signage is no longer doing its job functionally. So I would not recommend that you use the same pole for both forms of signage.
Well, I just look at where the right-of-ways fall, and knowing that those would have to fall into the right-of-way because of where they're posted, what's posted on them, and they're already there.
Yeah, so, no, it's a good question, and you know, I wish I had a better answer on whether they're all in the town right-of-way. I would assume they are. I don't want to guarantee that they are, but it's a fair question.
So it has been pursued with the town safety, or I guess you said that it would be a safety issue? Because
the idea of attaching business directional signage to street signage, which is created and exists for 911 purposes, among other reasons, I don't support that. I think it runs counter to the intent of that signage, and I think you stand to create distraction in an unsafe environment by having all forms of signage on one pole.
I think that.
So I recognize that's my opinion wholly, but I think that's my professional and personal opinion on the matter.
I think we had that test at in front of Black's, and they were gonna try to put them on the pole at Black's, and that was deemed not safe and by the Public Works, and so.
Okay. Anyone else on signs?
Steve Durgan from Sewell Road. First of all, I'd like to commend the committee for all the hard work done on this issue over many years. It's been a very complicated and long process. John mentioned that, and I think he's rightfully proud of the document that's been produced. And I must say that I was particularly moved by the comments of Lucas Roasting. I think that anybody that keeps a fair and open mind has to admit that the things that I believe Troy said are certainly viable. It seems to me that some areas, such as Bay Street, may have specific needs not adequately covered in the proposal. Certainly the kind of development that we look forward to in the New Hampshire Boat Museum certainly portends that. It seems to me that we can be flexible enough to handle this now rather than kicking the can down the road. So I would urge you to take into account some of the comments here today made in a public hearing and address the needs so we can make a very good document, maybe just a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, others? Then I'm going to close the public hearing, until January 7th. All of these will be continued on that evening. Go on to the next item, 175-175, terms defined. This is another definition for light industry. To amend the definitions portions of the ordinance to add a definition for industry light that includes manufacturing and assembly of products predominantly for previously prepared materials, adds accessory and permitted uses within industry light, and defines prohibited activities such as those that significant external effects impose significant risk to public health, safety, and welfare. I think there might have been a couple words missing from that, but I read it as it was written here. This one, as I said, is to change the definition, is to add a new definition for light industry, and this would be allowed currently in the Pine Hill Road Development District. The use industry is now allowed if a special exception is granted. However, there's no definition for industry. So when the planning board discussed this, we decided light industry would be a more suitable use in the area. Industry is being eliminated and replaced with light industry with a specific definition. Go ahead, Matt.
Nothing to add. I think that covers the change adequately. The public notice language was very thorough. What I would, I guess, add is, or just, I guess, focus on is that we are addressing an issue where a permitted use in the ordinance has no definition that is assigned to it, and therefore potentially opens that use category up to a lot of things. And therefore what we're doing in combination with the Pine Hill Road Development District Amendment that we'll talk about in a few minutes is narrowing the allowance for industry and defining it a little more clearly to include uses that are not basically impactful to anything exterior to the site. And also, once we get to the Pine Hill Road Development District, we're not changing whether it's a permitted or special exception use. We're actually maintaining that there as well. So really, what we're functionally doing is just defining what exactly industry means.
Okay, I'll open the public hearing on this item. Anyone want to comment on this definition?
I need to say my name again?
Yes, please.
Okay, Kirk Beswick from representing Taylor Community again. I want to thank you for going forward and trying to define what we mean by industry, specifically light industry. I think that's gives it some clarity as we talk about allowing different things up in that area up there, so that was a good move. However, as I think through what happened on Filter Bed when the boatyard was allowed to be built, it really didn't affect anybody. When I read what you wrote there, everything's great, except I think, and what I'd like to recommend is that we add to this traffic as a specific nuisance, because you've already identified noise, smoke, dust, vibration, that kind of thing. One of the things that really came out of the public hearing when we were talking about the warrant article relative to filter bed back there, the extension of Pine Hill back down filter bed, was the thing that the unintended consequence of allowing some of these things to happen in that area was a lot of traffic. And I'm thinking through, what if the property, one of the properties up on in this area was converted to light industry, which is fine, and then we allow the warehousing distribution, and the business is successful, and all of a sudden we have 53-foot tractor trailers running in and out of there with materials to offload materials and to deliver them, pick them up, and so forth. I think the unintended consequence of that increased industrial activity would be a nuisance to other people in the area, specifically some of the residential properties in that area. And as we think about the expansion of filter bed and the potential of that wrapping into the Pine Hill, I think that would just kind of expand what we've kind of determined as a problem with the traffic out on filter bed. So while I commend you for this, I really would recommend that we identify increased traffic as an additional nuisance that needs to be addressed by this particular amendment. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
Could I just briefly respond to that comment?
Okay, sure.
One of the important pieces to point out is that in order to receive a special exception, in order to do light industry, one of the criteria that you have to prove to the Zoning Board of Exception and Zoning Board of Adjustment, excuse me, and discuss with the Planning Board as part of that process is that there'll be no undue nuisance or serious hazard to pedestrian or vehicular traffic, including the location and design of access ways and off-street parking. And specifically, traffic congestion and circulation must be dealt with, but that's really through the review process, not through the use definition itself. So I think that we are addressing the issue, maybe not in the manner that Mr. Beswick is suggesting, but it is a part of the review process should any project be proposed that is light industry in nature. And I'm not, I guess one point I would make is that I'm not sure that traffic would be something that would be good to use to exclude a use from light industry. Rather, it's something that should be considered in the event that light industry is proposed to these boards.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Suzanne Ryan. The gentleman that spoke before me was far more generous than I would be. We heard the outcry last year about the allowed uses that currently exist and then the expansion. So I would request that that we not allow for light industry in that area. We currently allow for, and I had to pull up my Pine Hill, contractor's yard light, and then by special exception, contractor's yard light and
Contractor's yard, period.
Contractor's yard.
And that's special.
And contractor's yard light. We have two definitions that allow these almost types of use except for this manufacturing, production, assembly, repair, packaging. That's pretty broad. Even though it says light, it's still pretty broad, and I just don't see the need for it. The town, when they did their survey for the master plan, the question was asked by UNH relevant to, let's see if I can find it, relevant to provide land for commercial and light industrial uses, and less than half the people believed it was important for the town to provide area for such. So the general public has weighed in on this. I don't see it coming here anyway. I mean, we're not a major connector to any road that's going to be bringing in this kind of manufacturing and production and that whole list of stuff. We currently allow for warehousing, and I think what we allow for is sufficient, and I don't think there's a need for that. And when we get to the Pine Hill one, we can go read what those uses are that are currently allowed. I think it's adequate.
Well,
I don't know what you're trying to accomplish. by developing that area. You go up Elm Street, especially this time of year, it's quite lovely. I mean, the houses are quite nice. They're kept quite well. And then, of course, we have, when you go further up, you've got the town, town shed, but that's going to happen in any town anywhere, USA. But some of the business is set back. Winnipesaukee Lumber keeps their place nice. There's another one, like a linoleum and tile place. I don't know if they're still in business. They keep that very nice. But I would think, keep it a mixed use with residential, and then these uses that are allowed in Pine Hill by variance. We've given out variances for those shed storage buildings, places for expansion. They haven't had a hard time getting the variances. I don't know why you want to introduce into the community, period, light industry. I just don't see the need for it.
To be clear, the existing zoning allows for industry with no distinction. So the intent here was to define what actual types of industry might be appropriate there. So
I understand that, but what I'm asking for is to delete it out instead of trying to define it. And I will admit, last year I made the argument you need a definition, but that was absolutely correct. I remember, but now that I've seen the definition and thinking about light industry, Wolfeboro doesn't need it. The survey says they don't care about it, and I don't know. It should just be stricken from the zoning ordinance instead of trying to expand it.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, it's true that this is just a definition which could be applied in particular situations.
That's correct. I mean, I don't think...
We're not saying something now is going to be zoned any particular way. We're just providing a definition.
No, and I truly am sensitive to Suzanne's comments. I think they belong more on the next amendment we're going to talk about. But to Peter's point, you could adopt this amendment and functionally have no change in the ordinance at all, unless the other amendment fails in some way. You have then defined industry a bit more, and you are making a recommendation about what is allowed. So if the other amendments were to fail, you may be left with industry still being in the zoning ordinance, and it's likely that someone would use this light industry definition to define it. Does that make sense?
Well, what I'm trying to say is the Pine Hill one does allow by special exception light industry. So I'm arguing ahead of what I would be arguing, but I'm trying to explain the reason why. I don't think it should be. I think it should be stricken from the Pine Hill and thereby not proposed. So I'm asking that when we get to the Pine Hill, if an argument could be made by anybody that would convince you, then come back to that and delete it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ann Blodgett. I want to sort of add to what Mr. Beswick said. After the master plan meeting, I felt negligent having never been down Filter Bed Road very far, except in the very old days. I went down there and I was horrified. And behind me was a tractor trailer truck. On my way there, boats were cutting around that corner on Mill Street. I was like, what have we done? That storage unit, that storage building, and more storage buildings are going in. So I would add up there or other public safety and nuisance, because I don't think it's safe what's going on. It's not safe on Front Street for sure. I totally back up what those residents said. And then going around that corner by the brewery going past Mill Street, so they're using Libby. I mean, that's a residential area. Why are we impacting residential neighborhoods in such a strong way with gigantic behemoth storage buildings for boats that shouldn't be on some of those roads? Anyway, other people have since driven down there because they had no idea. I don't know when that went through, but it just seems frightening to me, so.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment here?
Sure. Yes.
I travel down that road many, many times during the wintertime to go cross-country skiing. I travel down that road many, many times during the summertime to do business down that road. I've walked down there to see the buildings down there. I remember when that road was nothing but a bunch of garbage down there. Those people have fixed those homes up very nicely. But there is a vision down there that can happen. The historic nature of the old house, which was the Kimball property, could be a lovely inn with cross-country capabilities. Could be a nice brew place. Across the street, there could be people who have nice home businesses. And as you further go up the road, yes, there is a warehouse up there, and it was approved by everybody on the planning board and was accepted. We need to be able to find places where people can put stuff around here. And unfortunately, there's a lot of land out there. There is wet land out there also, and our job is to protect it. We can allow things to go through. I've been there. I can't say there was one day that I went down there and there was a tractor trailer pushing me down the road. I saw the people walking down the road. I looked up, I could see the Taylor community and their nice development. I can see the people that have fixed up the area. I'm not really horrified of what's going on down there. I think it's been a dramatic improvement for the people and the community. We have to allow things to grow around here. Let's not be as closed off. We're responding to the comments of the Taylor community that said they wished we would consider light. We all were on the board. We hashed back and forth. What would possibly be the best thing where we could allow stuff to happen, allow a town to grow, and we could accept the neighbors' concerns and comments?
Hi, Jerome from Grove Street. I totally echo what John just said. I used to work at that lumber company when it did look kind of bad on both sides of the road. Now it looks nice down in there. I run back there and I don't have any tractor trailers. I've never seen a tractor trailer down there. Not that they're not there, but I haven't seen any when I was running. And we need to allow for business to growth in this town, and that is the area it needs to grow to, that and the Pine Hill. So we really need to look to the future and think about when that is going to be a road that goes all the way through there, because it's going to happen, maybe not in our lifetime, but it's going to happen, and that's what you guys are planning for right now. And I would submit that survey went to mostly residents that she referenced, because business people need expansion place, and they're the ones who said, yes, we need it, and the residents want everything to stay the same, so they're the ones who said we don't need it. So you got two different audiences you're trying to please at the same time. It's a miserable job, and I'm very thankful that you all are doing it and I don't have to. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, if you look at the uses permitted currently in Pine Hill Road District, they include printing plant, community services, storage and use of heavy industrial and mechanical equipment, metal shops, laundries, and cleaning establishments, including kennels. And some of them are by permit, others are by special exception. What we're trying to do is to change that and simply have light industry defined as we have it there, which I submit makes it better, not worse.
Okay, other comments? Okay.
I think my argument was made for me, that saying that the neighborhood is improved. It has improved, and not to the light industry or commercial use. It's improved because the housing is improved, the yards are kept nicer, and to allow this kind of use in that area is just going to make it go the other way. And the uses that are allowed in Pine Hill District now are almost to the point of what those are. But Wolfeboro is not going to, I guess I shouldn't worry about it. Wolfeboro is not going to attract that. So I guess I shouldn't worry about it, and you can just leave it there, because it's very unlikely that it's going to happen.
Wolfeboro has attracted that. We have PSI molded plastics out there, and I'm not suggesting these are examples of what we're thinking about here. We do have light manufacturing in many locations around town that we, that I think doesn't negatively impact abutting properties.
But they're not described like that. And we do have the Wickers building sitting there for how many years, and nobody's attracted to that. We have a lot of empty buildings and commercial buildings empty. So I don't think it's time for it, and I don't think it's needed. And then when we get to the Pine Hill one, I think we can look and see that all the uses that are allowed are almost duplicate when you look at whatever it is, contractor's yard and contractor's yard light. By the way, those definitions are almost identical except for the front footage setback. So just make them both the same. It's too complicated. You're making life too hard.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, any other comments on light industry? All right, thank you. Let me move on to the next one, which is Cotton Mountain Historic Agricultural District, and this is to amend the Cotton Mountain Historic Agricultural District zone by adding dimensional requirements, setback requirements, height requirements, permitted uses, and special exception uses in order to establish reasonable restrictions that align with adjacent residential agricultural district where none were pre-established. This, we felt that when we looked at the zoning ordinance, there were simply no standards included, as there are in every other zoning district. And so we simply added those, didn't change anything, simply added standards, setbacks, coverage, height, etc. Go ahead, Matt.
And I know Suzanne will speak to this a little bit tonight, and we have a meeting to talk a little further, but originally this was a petition warrant article that I believe was intended as an overlay zone over the underlying residential agricultural zoning in this district, and the intent was to increase the minimum lot size for lots that were within the 250 feet of the center line of the roads that are identified here. Unfortunately, we don't really know exactly how it happened, but when it was actually codified in the ordinance, what happened is a new zoning district that was not an overlay was created, and within that zoning district there were technically no permitted uses or dimensional standards allowed or delineated. So what we're proposing to do is essentially keep the existing zoning district that's defined, but then define the same use standards and dimensional standards that exist in the residential agricultural district that exists directly adjacent to it, with one exception. And that exception is we have proposed to remove the special exception uses of churches and contractors' yards, and that was based on a discussion we had at the planning board level. We didn't feel those uses were likely to occur within that 250 feet or any of the area on these roads, and therefore they weren't necessarily applicable, whereas they may be more applicable along Route 28, where I think those uses were intended to be.
Okay, thank you. Now open the public hearing on this item.
Roger Murray, I just have one question. How are you going to determine, say in 3 years, what the contiguous land of the present landowners is?
What I can tell you, Roger, is that I would urge you to attend the public hearing in a couple weeks, because we received the same comment from legal counsel today that I'd like to pass along to the planning board for their review.
That's a gnarly point.
Yes.
Right.
So that concern is front of our mind, but we are not prepared to address it this evening.
Yes.
The proposal is to incorporate all dimensional controls and all permitted and special exception uses with the exception of churches. There is a church there.
So the residential agricultural zone allows for churches and contractors' yards with some specific criteria for contractors' yards. But the planning board's feeling, I believe, was that it was not in the interest of this historic district, at least the dimensions that are defined in the zoning, to have a church or a contractor yard created anew within the zone.
Yeah, I can live with that, I guess. I mean, certainly contractors' yards would not be suitable. The other question that I would have is, and I didn't have time to compare what, in 175, 126, 5 special exceptions.
Yep.
Are there any new ones you're adding there, or are those pre-existing?
Those are the same that underlie already.
Okay.
No changes there. We're just removing those two.
Okay.
Just churches and contractors' yards.
All right, well, you're continuing it, so if I have a question, I'll be back.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anyone else? Planning board members, you're all okay. Okay, then I'm going to close this hearing for now and move on to the next item, 175-96 and 175-96.1, Pine Hill Road Development District, permitted uses and special exception uses, to amend the permitted uses within the Pine Hill Road Development District to include the following: retail, business, and contractor's yard light with specific conditions required. Further, to amend the permitted uses section to remove the following uses: printing plant, community services, assembly operations, storage and use of heavy industrial and mechanical equipment, metal shops, laundries, and cleaning establishments. To amend the uses permitted by special exception within the Pine Hill Road Development District by adding light industry as permitted and removing kennels as a permitted use. This one, we reviewed the permitted uses and special exceptions uses, and we felt that some of the uses weren't consistent with the purpose of this zone. So we removed assembly operation plant, printing plants, storage and use of heavy industrial or mechanical equipment in industry, and we added retail and business services. Those already exist in the area, and contractor's yard light, since we don't really have many other locations for those, and it was felt that we needed an additional location, and we added light industry. So go ahead, Matt.
Well said, Kathy. The only point I want to
Chair.
make is actually to...
I would like to recuse myself from this one also here, because a property up there, so.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you, Brad.
Ms. Ryan did raise the issue of contractor's yard versus contractor's yard light. There is a different buffer standard in what's proposed. However, in the definition sections of the section of the ordinance, contractor's yard light is only that which includes vehicle under 33,000 pounds, whereas a contractor's yard, a regular contractor's yard, can have vehicles that are larger in size, larger dump trucks. This is really intended to get at small, more pickup style trucks being allowed, while other larger dump trucks not being allowed. So that's the critical distinction, and that's defined in our definitions section of the ordinance. So I think that's important to point out as well. All I'd add to what the notice said.
Okay, so open the public hearing on this item. Any member of the public that wants to comment on the Pine Hill Road Development District changes?
My name is Elaine Hazeltine. I live on Pine Hill Road. I'm a resident. Yeah, thank you. I look at the current definitions under permitted uses and under special exceptions. And I guess I would want you all to consider the commingling again me on the residential end and the many businesses that are already currently in that district right now. So you want to, the way that I understand this, make permitted uses for many of the special exceptions below, and that are listed for the special exceptions below. And I would say, no, I don't want any more businesses on that road that aren't already listed under the permitted uses now. I go to work every day, I come home, and I want to come away from a business. So that would be the reason that I ask you to consider the people that live on that road. I understand we need a place to grow, but I think that we should also limit it. And I think that this opens it up when you change it from special exception to a permitted use. Retail businesses that are there, they're fine, and I think we need to consider them. If you open it up and you make them permitted uses, then they don't have to go that extra mile. And this affects the homes that get sold, what comes in there, and what gets, excuse me, I've got a little bit of a horse in my throat. What we have to deal with, I don't want to see another lumber yard across the street from my house. I know that you think it looks nice. I can't agree, but we won't go there tonight. I think that we really have to consider the residential areas around. So for the first part of it, the only, where it says further to amend the permitted uses sections to remove the following uses: printing, plant, assembly operations, storage, and use of heavy industrial and mechanical equipment, metal shops, laundries, and cleaning establishments. Those are all fine. Community services, I guess you'd need to define to me what community services are. Are we talking about a nursing home? What type of community services are we talking about?
So it's a really good question. The community services definition in the ordinance, or the use of that term in the ordinance, is not well defined. There's only one spot, in fact, where it is, and it talks about largely municipal services, honestly. So we felt that we couldn't clearly define it, and therefore it wasn't appropriate to have as a permitted use. There is no definition in the ordinance.
So obviously, if it's municipal, then I would agree. To permit uses within this area for retail businesses, contractors' yard, light with specific conditions required, in my opinion, that would not add value to my property as a residential building. Below, to amend the uses permitted by special exception within the Pine Hill Road Development District by adding light industry as permitted. Again, no, I would leave it as a special exception. I have no objection to removing kennels. There was one there several years ago. I can't say that it bothered me either way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Kirk Beswick again for Taylor. I have a lot of thoughts relative to this particular amendment. And one, I want to thank you because I know the board was grappling with how do we not only meld this neighborhood but address the need for economic development, because that's a pressure that the town's under. We've heard that through warrant articles and other expressions. And I think you've made a valiant attempt at trying to reduce the impact to abutters such as Elaine and others through defining what light industry really would be, and removing some of those obnoxious uses that you've heard about in some of the other public hearings. So I think this is a attempt in the right direction. So I commend you for working on that. But I have to ask a few questions and echo some of the other sentiment too as I think through the future. Light industry, while I commend you for that definition, I'm still wondering if it's really appropriate, as others have mentioned in this area, because as I go up and down the road now to Sugar Hill, I see the big buildings there, and I know there's some vacant ones. But then closer down towards us, toward the end of Bay Street, you know, there's a lot of commingling there that I wonder if I lived there, how would I feel about that? So one of the first things I want to do is suggest, and if we could put up the map that we had with the pink sections there when we were talking about cell phones, it may be helpful for folks to see that, if you can do that, Matt. There's actually a big chunk of undeveloped land that part of the previous Warren article was trying to address and wrap into the Pine Hill development that may lend itself better to a subsection or maybe even a different zoning type, because there's no abutters up there. There's no one that would be negatively impacted by some of the things that we're trying to drive into this amendment. And maybe as part of the strategic planning, the long-term planning, the town ought to take another look at that and say maybe we should take some of these objectionable or potentially objectionable uses and move them to a new subsection out there where they would be less likely to affect abutters. And then I have some questions because I keep seeing the contractor yard coming up, and I see Wolfeboro as a destination town. It's a lovely town, and I boat here all the time. And I'm wondering where all the contractors are coming from that are forcing the town to address contractor yards so frequently in our ordinances. And specifically, I know that someone behind us has a desire to build those, and there is probably a need for those. But what is the driving motivation to address that so frequently in our ordinances?
Building.
Yeah, it's what they do.
It's a tremendous, although tourism is our primary industry, I think building is a very close second. Yeah. And I would include with that site work and landscaping as well. Those are huge industries in the town. Okay. They're not well quantified by economic studies, but they are some of our primary, one of our primary economic drivers.
Okay, and I've heard that kind of peripherally too from some of my subcontractors that they need a place to go. Yep. And one of the suggestions I would make there, having worked in many different communities across New Hampshire, is that in other areas they've taken large commercial buildings and sublet them. Mm-hmm. And if we have vacant commercial buildings, why don't we make exceptions for that and have those developed to create spaces that are not going to be objectionable to other abutters for that? Just a suggestion. Yep. The other thing I noticed when I was looking through this, if we were going to have a contractor yard somewhere around our property, and having dealt with landscaping for so long, a 5-foot buffer really doesn't amount to too much when you're talking about if you're a residential neighbor in terms of either noise buffering or visual buffering. So I think we need to, I would recommend anyways, that we review that and come up with a little more robust way to buffer abutters.
You're talking about the height requirement.
Height, depth requirements, and I know the setbacks are only 25 feet is pretty close to a property line. You'd probably want a pretty strong screening potential there in order to buffer somebody from that. And additionally, to some of my earlier comments, I really would be concerned about one of the things we've been thinking about internally was the nuisance part of noise. I don't believe that there's a really strong noise ordinance relative to obnoxious use of noise in this town. And when we start thinking about expansion of commercial aspects in the Bay Street or even in the Pine Hill, one of the things that concerns me is quality of life, and traffic and noise would certainly be one of those things. And I think that one of the things we would recommend is build that out to define what that is. Like, for instance, if someone built a motocross track out near the wetlands out back, it wouldn't be anyone's neighbor, wouldn't benefit too many people, and everybody would hear it. So it's one of those things that we all recognize, but the sound of, crushing stone that already exists, beepers of backing up trucks and that type of thing, while they seem minor, if you have to live with that in your residential neighborhood, it does ultimately affect your way of life. So I think, and the other thing, when you were describing the difference between contractor yards, light, I was starting to think about that, where, the Key Day property actually is allowing Bradley to move their equipment in and out. It doesn't really bother us. It's smaller equipment and pickup truck size stuff. If we were to allow it under the contractor yard, larger equipment with backup beepers and that type of thing, that would be objectionable. And I think that you probably, my recommendation would be, see, if we're going to talk about contractor yard light, limit the size of those vehicles to light commercial trucks, like 1-ton trucks or smaller, just so we don't have to deal with that kind of nuisance. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
Suzanne Ryan, question. In the definition section, we have assembly light, and we have manufacturing light. Are you saying they're not going to be included in this zone?
Correct.
Good. So then, I see that you have not stricken the, under K, second page, storage facilities, including self-storage, fine, and storage of equipment and warehouse and wholesale distribution facilities. So you're adding storage of equipment, such as?
It could be, I think it could be rental equipment for contractors. I think it could be larger equipment even, as long as it is limited exclusively to storage and not to other incidental uses to those vehicles, including stockpiling of materials and other things.
Would it have that weight requirement like the other one does?
It would not as it's proposed, at least.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, you'd really clean this thing up, and then you add contractor's yard light and light industry. So what you took out, you put back in another way.
Disagree, Suzanne, very strongly on that. What we took out far outweighs what we put in. What we put in is a small allowance to people who want to do business in that area, in those particular industries, light industry and contractors' yards light, that we removed a whole bunch of noxious stuff.
Yeah, you did.
In my opinion, this ordinance going out to the public to
I'm
be voted on
congratulating you for taking out some of the...
is a good change. Is it perfect? Nothing is. And
Well,
every ordinance that any planning board publishes and the town votes on is not intended to stay forever. It can always be improved. And it has to adapt to changing economic times as well.
I'm trying to commend you for what you took out. You took out a lot of the things that were very, very inappropriate for what is a residential area. I see it as residential when I drive through. I'm accustomed to seeing the lumberyard and the linoleum place and so forth. And as I say, they're well kept. They've been there forever. I'm not accustomed, and I do not care to see contractors' yards, and most certainly light industry. I think you're doing a disservice to the district. I don't think there's a calling for it in the town. I don't hear an outcry from anyone with an application saying, I want to put something in, I've got this great idea, I want to put in some sort of packaging, something or other, distribution. I don't see it. I think if there was some kind of a need, knocking at the door, saying, let me in, then yeah, but you hear the neighborhood saying they don't want it. Personally, it's not going to affect me. You know, I go down that street once in a while, I cut through from going to the dump or something like that, but I think it's a disservice to the neighborhood. I don't think the town needs it, and I would ask that you not go forward with it.
Okay.
Other than the things you took out.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Jerome Holden, Grove Street. I just want to say what I said for the last one. This is where we need our expansion, and we've got to have a place to expand. I mean, packaging industry is going up Everything's a mail order. What if UPS or FedEx needs a place in this town? Where would you put them? You know, that's where it's for. That's what that area is for, the industrial area where plastic place is and where Wickers was, all in that area. And that's what's in this district, right? That's what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jerome, they just go get a variance.
And any other comments?
I can make a
Go
comment.
ahead.
So when we talked about the light contractor's yard, we stuck in a provision here under the special exemption uses under Roman numeral 1 under D. It says the proposed use, including all improvements, is set back 75 feet from the front property line. Try to push people back and give that buffer screen. So there was some thought there about doing that. The beepers on the vehicles, that could happen on any older person's vehicle that can't see out the back window. So I don't know how we would regulate the beepers on the vehicles. That could happen on anybody's vehicle. And that's all I have.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Judith Morrison, and I live at 95 Pine Hill Road. I am one of those abutters, and I want to speak to living across the street from the lumber yard and also down the street from a contractor's yard. One of the issues that Mr. Beswick brought up was the issue of traffic and of large trucks, and that is certainly an issue on 109A due to the industry that's there. When you have 40-foot tractor-trailer trucks at 4 o'clock in the morning stopping and dieseling down on your front lawn, and that's where they have parked on my front lawn, it becomes an issue to abutters. When Sunday mornings contractors' yards are open with backing up beeping trucks, it does disrupt sleep. So I would argue that there needs to be some strong involvement in dealing with the issue of the heavy traffic, the timing of it, and the noise levels that it produces. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Kirk again. I want to address first, John, your comment, because I live in a residential area, and if the zoning in my area, which is rural conservation, allowed a contractor yard to abut me, and there were 25 electrical vans with beepers on them coming and going from 6 a.m. to 9 o'clock at night, I think I'd be negatively impacted. So the contractor yard, while I know we've worked to make that a little less noxious, and I do hear what you're saying, I'm trying to put myself in the position of the abutters and also, our 24 residents who actually have Key Day behind them. They have Victor Druin, who knocked down his building, and we had construction back there for quite a while. And, we heard all that. And if that was to be a day in, day out type of thing, I think that would be something that would impact our residents significantly. The second thing is, as this gentleman noted, we do need expansion, and I want to address that. Taylor Community is considering, first off, we're in the process of buying Sugar Hill, which is a $15 million acquisition for us long-term. And additionally, building a assisted living, nursing, and memory care facility in this building, in this town, which would be somewhere between $14 to $20 million investment. And for us to consider doing that and having a contractor yard built behind us, a cell tower, a cemetery or a UPS facility, we would have to think about our expansion plans in terms of, is that $30 million really worth it to have all that stuff built around us and then say, why did we do this? Because no one wants to live here. And I'm only saying that, not as a threat, but I'm saying that because I know you're trying to grapple with the future needs of the town. And that's a tough thing to do in terms of the economic development that's needed for this town, the tax revenue that every town needs. At the same time, those of us who sit here and want to vocalize our concerns, we're speaking from what we envision could happen and trying to figure out whether our investment in our own homes or in our businesses is going to be worth it based on what we see happening with the amendments. So again, I'm just speaking for basically to the things you've already heard us advocate for and what we've heard tonight. And I commend you for trying hard to walk the razor edge line of trying to make this all balanced. But at the same time, please take into account, you know, the residential abutters and those of us that are trying to make significant improvements here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Then I'm going to close this public hearing. And again, all of these items will be continued on January 7th, 20.
I recommend a motion by the board to continue all 7 amendments to that date.
All right.
Exactly.
Motion has been made and seconded to continue all of the amendments until January 7th, 2020. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And it was 6-0. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. Folks, thank you very much for your comments.
And your patience.
And your patience. Yes, right. Okay. The next item is the opportunity.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, it's after the opportunity for public comment.
Oh, yes, okay. Well, the next item is the opportunity for public comment. If anyone wanted to comment additionally. Okay. All right, then we'll continue on to, did you want to say something before the voluntary merger issue?
Well, I wanted to apologize to Mr. Hodder for suggesting that tonight we would get through the whole agenda because I'm not sure that we will. So I wanted to ask the board if you want to prioritize the voluntary merger right now.
Well, we could do that.
Okay, you're okay,
I mean,
you're
we
okay.
can do that,
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to be sensitive to your time, so.
Well, I guess I have to apologize to Mr. Hodder, too.
Well, no,
I told him we would be done.
It's wonderful.
I had promised him that we would not
Rarity
go
for
so long.
apologize,
But,
Mr. Hodder.
so, yes, voluntary merger.
Remind my wife to apologize too. It's a rarity in my house.
Okay, voluntary merger. Matt? Oh, okay.
This is a voluntary merger of 2 lots, lots 2 and 3, particularly 154-2 and 154-3 on Cotton Mountain Road. As you can see here, I've recommended the merger based on no creation of nonconformity and actually bringing it into full conformity, and see no outstanding issues that would be created via the merger. And I'm happy to take any questions on the application.
Anyone have any questions, concerns?
I have a question of concern. I just wanted to bring it up once again, folks.
Okay.
We talk about workforce housing. We talk about building lots. I'm not discouraging this person from doing what they have to do, their own right. I want to just relay this to the board again. When we take 2 lots and we make them 1, there's a potential that there's 2 houses there, now there's 1. And the gentleman wants to do it. I'm not going to be morbid. There's lots out there that people are thinking about doing it. And every day we lose one, there's that much less workforce housing ability. We're taking it out of play. But it's his right. I recognize it.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Would somebody be willing to make a motion to approve this merger?
So moved.
Seconded.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. All right, the Plan New Hampshire Charrette Letter of Support. The suggestion has been made to have a charrette down around the Railroad Avenue area and include Weiner Street, which has several town-owned properties, And a charrette is an opportunity for citizens to get together with professionals, have discussions about how areas could be developed or improved. And so that's, Matt, do you want to add to this?
I would add only that I hope I addressed any questions about the charrette program in the letter that I included with the documents in your package. This is probably the first time I think that you're seeing the map to this extent as I've put it here, with all the parcel uses identified. And I'm happy to answer questions about why certain properties are in or out, but would just sort of emphasize that this is not intended to be a hard boundary line, and really that we expect to look at areas both inside and outside of the charrette boundary that I've drawn here as part of the program. I also want to add that based on a few conversations I've had with folks, that this really isn't intended to undermine any of the progress or lack thereof that has been made on some of the properties here. Clearly the town has invested some serious capital in many of these properties that you see, whether it be the Fossfield building, the Glendon Street parking lot that was created, and then other private property owners that have improved their properties substantially, and of course the municipal government's acquisition of a few vacant pieces of property as well. The intent is really to instead look at this area comprehensively and how those different independent efforts might fit together long term. So I think that when we're looking forward to projects like whether it's the freight shed, whether it's the vacant space within the railroad station, whether it's wayfinding signage that we talked a little bit about in this area this evening, how all those pieces might fit together. And I guess I'm ignoring the big one, and that is the municipal electric generation building, the community center, which I hope we can make some progress on in the coming year.
Right.
So really the intent here is to come up with a general vision. It will not make any specific recommendations about any of these individual buildings, but is intended to help us think about how this area could develop or not in the future.
Right, and it all really started with the railroad station committee, where they were trying to think of other uses for the railroad station. Should we expand restrooms? What uses should go in? And then what about the freight station? And then Dave Ford has ideas for the little park area down where the water skiers, where their area is. Then as we started thinking about it, and Maggie Steer was involved, and I believe the Heritage, yes, that they're also. So this is sort of a group, bring everybody together. So then we started walking around and looked at the Laner Street area. There's a lot of redevelopment opportunities there, including some housing opportunities in the Laner Street area, which is right in downtown. So that's how it all kind of came about. And so now what you need, Matt, is just for us to say we support the idea as a planning activity.
Correct. My request tonight is to endorse a letter of support for the charrette program so that we can move forward with the application. And I'd like to get that from the board this evening.
Has the Board of Selectmen
thank you for asking
Yes,
that. The Board of Selectmen have already approved the letter of support.
Right, and the Housing Coalition also sent a letter.
Not to be too much of a curmudgeon, but is this more than just an opportunity for talking and brainstorming and feeling good and having coffee and, you know,
I hope
$6,000?
it's a really fair question, Mike. I hope that it is.
I remember the last charrette we had here. I don't even remember when that was.
That was in the 90s.
In the 90s, and it was mostly an opportunity for folks to gather at the end of the day and have a really good chinwag.
It's a great question, and I think that there are properties here that are very ripe for some action, and we're hearing that in one form or another, whether it's through the Girl Scouts or other entities. I believe that we need some professionals to come in and give us some guidance about what to do with those properties. So I think that there will be real action taken after this charrette. Are there going to be things that are recommended in here that the community may never do? Yeah, I think there will be. I really do. I think there are going to be some potential recreational amenities that are recommended that we can't really realistically accommodate. but I think they will give us some suggestions that we can implement even next year in the budgeting process for particularly the municipal structures that are within this boundary area.
Who's going to be cluing them into local needs? They won't know the town or the people or the buildings here.
That's what we do the charrette for. So the two-day program is going to be all about meeting with you guys and others like you to gather data, and they're going to get a lot of that information in advance as well. So if we proceed with this, I will have to pass them along to them our master plan and other documents that give them perspective on all of the properties in this general area as we've sort of talked about them in recent history.
And those 2 days are worth 25 to 80K worth of billing?
Yes.
2 days?
Yes.
Good business.
It's not a business. It's a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit.
That's my point, though.
Yeah, right. Well, no, I'm not sure that I am.
Are we really going to be, is it realistic to expect we could get as much as $80,000 worth of consulting in a 2-day charrette, where they listen, coming to the topic with the only background they can gather through the internet, through reading, and maybe talking to you ahead of time?
So I would say that I'm actually someone who participated in a charrette, and there was a substantial amount of pre-charrette work as far as research and other site visits that I had to do. Was it $80,000 a particular charrette that I participated in? I can't guarantee that, but it's, I guess, to your point, it's not just the 2 days. There's substantial pre-charrette work, and the charrette report takes some time to develop after the fact as they compile the materials. So I don't know that it's $80,000, but it's definitely more than $6,000. So I guess that would be my answer.
You think it's worth the town spending $6K on?
I do.
Okay.
I feel strongly in that. I feel strongly that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I recognize that charrettes are generally considered to be fluffy in a lot of senses. I understand where that comes from, but I think that this could provide us some really perfectly timed guidance on a few critical sites. And if nothing else, get people together to have an actual conversation about it, as opposed to the conversation that we hear that the community center should be knocked down or the community center should be this. Let's actually get some stuff on the record about what we really should be doing with that site. That's what I think the value add would be for me.
Yeah, and I think really will involve a lot of people. I mean, the Girl Scouts, I mean, I think they're going to want to be involved. So if we can get some different age groups, I think that would be helpful.
Well, I guess my comment would be that we could go and invent the wheel of how you deal with municipal properties and this kind of property and maybe come up with our own solution. But if you get some people who have dealt with this kind of issue before, it is going to help to frame our conversation and get us going in the right direction. You know, we need to use people from the outside who have had experience with this kind of thing.
Okay.
I got some information here that I'd like to pass along. I'm looking at this map and I'm saying to myself, there's things here that the town paid for through its employment, where we were told that certain things were going on in these properties. When I look at other properties, I see like the buildings that we tore down, and I say, well, to me, that would be the focus area. Instead of spreading yourself all out so thin and just kind of blotting things, why don't we put our focus to one area where we know nothing's going on, and then these areas that we were told stuff was going on because we paid somebody in our town government to do it. Then they told us what they were going to do for the money. And now I'm thinking, okay, well, why did our town resources spend so much time and come up with ideas? Now we're going to hire a nonprofit agency to come do our work again. It does bother me that we're not being finite in our thought process. If we can be finite and we can focus on one area, I don't see it being a problem as an example and saying, okay, we have a little bit of trust and we kind of see what's going to happen here. Then we move down the road a little bit rather than taking a big shot at something and we don't know what we're going to get here.
So my opinion would be somewhat the opposite. I would think that it would be nice to have a comprehensive look at all of these parcels. There are, there are little areas here, little areas there, but we have a number of town-owned properties and a street that's sort of muddling along right now that really could have a comprehensive view. It would benefit to have an overall idea of what this might become before we go and pick, we want to do this here and that there. I think it would be nice to have an idea of how it connects to town.
Do we feel that we've paid somebody already to go out there and do it, and either we're saying their fruits of labor were not worth it, and so we should look the other way?
Are you talking about a study that was?
No. I'm saying through our town government, we put projects out. We say we're going to put the money here, and we're going to do this here. And like the freight station, okay, we have bought the freight station.
Yeah.
It's something in the works. It may not happen. We've already been told there's 8 parking spots for $45,000 a piece that can be put there. So we already know that. I'm just saying, I mean, we've spent resources as a town. Are we wasting our money as a town by having our people go out and do this stuff and then not following through with it? Or I just don't see any continuity in our planning.
I guess they'd have to make sure that there was continuity. That would be up to Matt to make sure that these charrette folk know the history of the freight building, know the history of the buildings that were torn down, and can incorporate those histories into their, however they're going to run their charrette. But I've got to follow up on something that John said. I support you in this. When you look at the charrette boundary and the properties that are included within it, there's an awful big diversity there. A lot of different kinds of uses. You've got waterfront, you've got a parking lot, you've got 2 vacant lots, you've got the brand new Parks and Rec facility, you got the potential, whatever it's going to be, senior community center, the parking lot below it, and part of the Bridge Falls walking path. I mean, to do all of that in a 2-day charrette is really going to be stretching our members, because there's a lot of stuff that each one of these particular areas, just the waterfront alone, what should we be doing with that? Could take up a day. And then what do we do with the 2 vacant lots next to the Parks and Rec building? That's a half a day. And we haven't even begun to get at the senior community center. That's maybe 2 days all by itself. So I'm just wondering if we're biting off too big of a chunk.
Well, we did ask that question, right, Matt?
Yeah, and the recommendation was that we should avoid specific sites because this is not a study of a specific site or building. We did ask whether this area was too big or too small, just right. I think the reaction we got was that it was just right.
Right.
They actually were envisioning that we would almost include all of downtown, which would just make absolutely no sense.
Did you get similar questions from the BOS?
No, but I think these are legitimate questions. I just think that. Can I quickly comment on John's?
Sure.
So, I think the answer is, and it's not fun to hear, but I don't think we are coordinating on a lot of what we're doing here. We've got, you look at these different properties, we've got Municipal Electric Department and Parks and Recreation Department that manage the 2 facilities on that 1 lot. Parks and Rec is using their facility actively. Municipal Electric Generation Building has no plan for it at all. And frankly, it's being used as office space. We then we have a Railroad Ave layout project that was already approved and should have been executed to lay out the road there. It's not done. We have a freight shed that is currently in conversation at the Board of Selectmen level that the future is frankly uncertain about. We have a vacant space at the railroad station that a separate committee is dealing with. And so we have all these groups, and that's just, I think, a quarter of what's here, to your point, John. I think that's just a quarter of what we've proposed in this area. And I don't think there's a lot of coordination. And I guess what I'm thinking is this a good way to maybe help some of that happen? That's a question I'm asking. I think the answer is yes, but I don't.
Yeah, ambitious project if you're going to do it all in 2 days.
I think that's fair. I do. I'm concerned about that too, but I really do agree with John in the sense that I think we've got a lot going on here, and there has been investment. There's even operational investment in these buildings on an ongoing basis. We've got departments looking at these things all the time. We've got the municipal electric department about to put a new substation in down here, but they aren't necessarily talking to each other about what this area is going to look like in the future. That's what I hope this thing might actually provide some direction on. I guess, does that answer your question at all, John? I mean,
It kind of does, and you know, it's more about moving forward. I hate to see us waste money on areas, and then we overlay ourselves and do something else and spend more money on it, and we know we're wasting money as a town. This monies could be spent better in other places with resources and paying our people a little bit more and paying more people to do more around our town. I mean, you have to look and see the big picture. And to me, that's what I'm seeing.
Okay, and to me, it seemed like a good opportunity to coordinate a lot of the things that are going on as individual projects, and people don't seem to be talking to one another. And so it almost seemed like an opportunity to be able to jumpstart something happening in that area, because there's a lot of potential.
honestly, one of the things, I know it's maybe the railroad station committee that came to mind when you think of how this started, but
yeah.
I don't know if everyone remembers when Barry came forward with his proposal for the substation last year. Barry was not, this is not a discredit to him, he had no thought about landscaping or screening or anything down there, because Barry is not thinking about what this area looks like. Barry is thinking about, I need to create a new substation so I can diminish or handle extra load, share load. But what if Barry is involved in a bigger conversation so that he understands what the intent is for this area down here? He's actually engaged with the people who are, like the planning board, where he normally wouldn't be engaged. That's what I think we can do here. I don't think this 2 days is going to solve it, Mike, honestly. But I hope it does get people talking to each other, and I know that's kind of a cliche thing to say, but I'm hopeful that maybe it helps do some of that. And, yeah, I think
Want a motion?
Piece, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, I'd be happy to move.
I mean, it's going to put some of these smaller little ideas and projects into a larger context. And, you know, it may end up being that when you look at what goes on down at the railroad station, we're going to say, yeah, that's fine the way it goes, and you're really going to concentrate on some of these other areas which need to be revitalized and brought in. I don't think it's too much to talk about. I think it's a good starting point.
The only other thing, the last thing I'd add is just if you have concerns, come talk to me, and let's make sure they're on the table now, right, so that we can sort of, I know where you two are coming from. Let's get ahead of it now, try and tailor the charrette to it, because it's going to be the Heritage Commission and the Planning Board that are kind of helping build momentum behind this thing. So it's important that your interests are reflected.
Yeah, I move to support that the Board of Selectmen / Planning Board draft a letter of support for the Town of Wolfeboro's 2019/2020 Plan NH charrette application for the Railroad Avenue / Laner Street / Crossfield area, conditional upon voter approval of the 2020 Town of Wolfeboro operating budget.
Okay, thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. Stay tuned, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll keep you up to date on this. Okay. It's almost 10 o'clock. What other items are crucial?
Nothing is crucial. These items can wait until the next agenda. They really, the only one that concerns me is the master plan implementation, Kathy, but I think that can wait. I mean,
I know.
Yeah, right.
No, you can't do anything when they're there.
Yeah, we can't, can't lose the master plan, but we'll put it on the next.
Everyone's got their little piece of the action. They do.
I just wanted to ask one.
I'm sorry, I thought we were done. I thought we had adjourned also. I beg your pardon, Madam Chairman.
It's okay.
No questions. I'm good.
Okay, can we just quickly do the minutes from the 19th? page. Okay, I just had one change on page 7 at the bottom, where it says Mike Hodder asked if there was any change on the Wolfeboro. It should be Wolfeboro Falls Business District boundary change. And any other change? So I'll make
I don't see, on page 7, I did not see a notation that the board voted to accept the shorefront residential district from placement of towers when we were discussing the Telecommunications Act. Mike Hodder confirmed, and consensus of the board agreed to hear all 7 zoning amendments, but in between those two, there should have been a motion to approve the exemption of the shorefront residential district.
Okay.
Okay, and we certainly did discuss that, yeah, okay.
Fair.
Okay, so somebody want to make a motion to accept these minutes as corrected?
So moved.
Thank you. Motion's second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. And folks, I sent you this. John had some questions for me, asking me what the heck I was sending this to you.
I wondered about that.
I sent it because I was asked to. This is the petition to lay out filter bed road that
But there,
they...
In 1995.
at the risk of being critical to the person who requested it, I have no idea what the context is.
I don't.
Right,
that's
and
the other-
all I had was the request, and I'm looking at it, and I thought, I can't really read this very well.
And so.
It says it was laid out in 1995, and in 97
Yeah,
they
but-
suggested that.
I just didn't understand.
Listen, I get a lot of mail during the day. The one that gets the most attention is you've won $1 million, not this is your bill, and other ones don't have anything, and that would be going in the trash.
Put it in your pending, put it in your pending file. You know who this person is, and you know it's going to come in.
Okay,
Pending file, Mike.
so the meeting is adjourned, and happy holidays, everyone.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everybody. Seriously.
Great.